Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
This is the time to resume the interviews of the candidates for the Supreme Court. We were on recess since yesterday, and we're going to start this morning with Mr. Kunert. Good morning.
Good morning.
We're ready to hear your opening statement, or it's not a statement, opening remarks, so go ahead.
Thank you, Justice Wiggins. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I first want to start off by saying thank you to all of you for being here today and giving me this opportunity to be here today. This is a very prestigious position, and I am very pleased and honored to be considered for it. I also want to say thank you for your time. I know that this commission takes a lot of your time away from your family and your professional careers, so I appreciate you doing that today and throughout this process. I've also enjoyed my time meeting with many of you individually. Getting to know you personally has been something that I didn't expect to enjoy as much as I did. So I just want to say thank you for taking the time away to meet with me personally as well. One little caveat before I get into more of my opening, so to speak. I'm not one to really talk about myself too much, so it's a little bit more difficult for me to do that. But I'm going to set my humility aside here and try to describe myself so you can understand who I am and where I come from. I graduated from Drake Law School in 2005. I graduated with highest honors. I was Order of the Coif. I was the top 5% of my class at Drake that year. I served on the law review, both my second and third year of law school. And I was honored to be elected SBA president, which is essentially student body president, my third year of law school, by my peers, something I'm very proud of. I definitely enjoyed my time at Drake. I worked hard. My second and third years were probably the busiest years I've ever had, but it paid off in the long run as far as my academic achievements that I'm very proud of. Before Drake Law School, I attended Truman State University down in Kirksville, Missouri. I was there for 3 years before I transferred to Arizona State down in Tempe, Arizona, living in Scottsdale. I made the move because I had family down there and thought I wanted to live my life down there. Life changes, of course, and I graduated from Arizona State and moved back to Des Moines to attend Drake Law School. Following graduation from Drake, I was honored to be hired by Nyemaster Good law firm here in Des Moines. If you're not familiar with Nyemaster, we have 3 offices. We have our home office here in Des Moines, and then we have 2 other offices, one in Ames and one in Cedar Rapids. Nyemaster, we have approximately, I haven't counted it lately, but probably around 90 attorneys, which makes us one of the largest, if not the largest firms in the state of Iowa. I've been there for 13 years now. I'm in the litigation department, and I practice pretty much solely defense work in the litigation department. I have handled some plaintiff cases. Many of those have been commercial cases, and there were a few employment cases as well that we handled the plaintiff side. Nyemaster is made up of some very wonderful and amazing people and attorneys, some very competent attorneys that specialize in pretty much every area of the law except for family law and criminal law, which is wonderful to practice with such a great group of people, because it's helped me to hone my practice and become the lawyer that I am today. My practice primarily now is the labor and employment defense. So I defend usually individuals and companies when it comes to claims under the Iowa Civil Rights Act, under the federal Title VII, the ADA, the ADEA, those types of cases. My practice when I started at Nyemaster, though, was much more broad. As an associate there, I handled pretty much any case that came in front of me, which at a firm like Nyemaster could be anything in the civil arena, defense related. So I jumped right in. I've tried, as you've probably seen in my application, I've tried many cases, some jury cases, bench trials, some of those first chair and some of those second chair. I've also done appellate work, both before the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. My practice is very reading and researching and writing intensive, which I think would make me a good candidate for this position. My practice area, even though I live in Polk County and I practice in Polk County. My practice isn't limited to Polk County. I have cases all over the state of Iowa, and I travel all over the state of Iowa for those cases. In fact, I would say many of my cases are not in Polk County. They're out in some of the rural counties of Iowa. I also do federal work as well, cases before the Northern District and Southern District of Iowa. At NIMASTER, I'm proud to say that I serve as the chair of the hiring committee, and I've been in that position for a few years now. I also manage the associates at the firm. I also chair the diversity and inclusion committee, which I'm also very proud of as well, and we established that a few years ago at NIMASTER Good. And just a little bit about my background as well. I was born here in Iowa, in Hampton, Iowa. I lived there for a few years before moving up to Mason City, where I lived until about 4th grade, and I moved down to Johnston, and so I've been in Des Moines ever since that time. In conclusion, I feel that my academic achievements and my work experience would make me an excellent candidate for this position. I've submitted in my application some of my writing samples and also additional information that would demonstrate that I am an excellent candidate for this position. So in conclusion, I'm asking for your support and I'm asking for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kunert. We'll see if anybody has any questions, and we'll start with Mrs. Pearson this morning.
Thank you for being here.
You need to take the mic.
Just have to remember that. Thank you. Am I on? Okay.
Hope so.
Great. Well, thank you for being here today, and thank you so much for your application. I know when I met with you, enjoyed our time learning about your background, and just wanted to ask if you talked about some significant accomplishments in your life, if there's anything that you haven't covered or that was just very meaningful to you and kind of helping to shape who you are and how you would feel that would benefit the judicial system.
Are you referring to professional accomplishments?
Yes.
Or, thank you. I would say, and I think I pointed this out in my application, when I first started as an attorney, within 6 months I was trying a jury case. And I just kind of jumped right into that and very much enjoyed it. And after that, I kind of hit the ground running and made sure that I was getting as much experience as possible because I wanted to be involved in all aspects of whatever I could at NIMASTER in the legal profession. And I think that will help me, or it will help me in this position because of my experience and the breadth of what I've handled as a litigation attorney in my 13 years of practice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Bowden? Excuse me, Mr. Berger? Mr. Diaz?
I want to talk about this concept of diversity. Can you first of all talk about it in the context of how that plays a role in your firm? And then I'd like to get your input in terms of how this commission ought to consider the concept of diversity in terms of its decision making.
I think diversity is extremely important. And I'm not just talking about your ethnicity or your sexual orientation or your gender. I think your background generally is diversity. And the more diverse individuals you have, the more well-rounded individuals you have, and the more points of view that come into play. I think it's very difficult sometimes to make decisions as a group when everyone has the same background or the same point of view. You need that input from people from all walks of life to understand where other people are coming from, because Iowa's made up of diverse people. It's not just made up of one group of people. So all of the Iowans need to be represented on the court. And I think that, as I pointed out in my application, the court is diverse. The justices on the court have different backgrounds. But there's other areas that need to be represented, whether it would be gender, race, sexual orientation. I think that's important. Now, I don't think that's the deciding factor. I think that you still need a qualified candidate. And if they have that diversity as well, I think that's just another reason to put them in that position.
if I may follow up, let's assume that you've got, 20-some candidates that are generally all well qualified. Where then does diversity sort of fit into that analysis?
Well, I think with the 20 candidates, obviously they're probably diverse in their own way. But I think that for a position like this, where you're representing all of Iowa, I think that you can consider a little bit more a certain person and how they're diverse, and if that person is represented on the court, and if not, I think they may get a little ahead of the other candidates for that reason, to make sure that you do have that well-rounded court and that you have the state represented in that manner. Thank you.
Dr. Taylor? Mr. Bevel? No question. Ms. Sinclair? Ms. Diekman? Here.
That'll work. Mr. Kunert, you talked a little bit about trying cases all over the state of Iowa. Have you found a difference in trying cases, whether it's in a smaller county versus Polk County, and how does that affect you in preparing, and how would you think that would affect you as a Supreme Court justice looking at cases from different areas?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I've found some differences. Are you talking more juries or?
Right.
Okay. Yes. I mean, I think that as a lawyer, you're always going to evaluate who the individuals are who might be in your jury pool, because you definitely want to understand where they're coming from and how they're going to make their decision on your case. So I do find, depending on where you are in the state, that you might have differing points of view compared to being in Polk County or Lynn County or Johnson County. I think that for my practice, I tend to make sure that I understand those individuals and their points of view, so that I can reach out to them in a way that they feel that I'm trustworthy, which I feel I am, and understand who they are. So I think that's important. I think that's important for the court too, because when you get these cases from some of the rural counties, you have to understand why those parties are before the court and understand their backgrounds when you're deciding, things that affect their livelihood.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Sukup?
Thank you. Mr. Kunert, you mentioned you headed up the hiring committee for your law firm. What are the two qualities that you look for most in recruiting attorneys to your firm?
There might be more than two, if that's okay. I definitely look at academics. That's a big thing, to make sure that the person is competent in the practice of law. Then I also look at their personality. I always tell candidates, this is not just my interview of you, it's your interview of us as well, because I want you to be able to fit in at the firm and feel comfortable at the firm. So I want to make sure that person has a good personality and has a good fit with the other members of the firm. Those are two of the main qualities I look for. Another one is obviously a good work ethic. Someone who's a hard worker, because I feel that's important, especially in your early years as a lawyer, to learn the practice of law and to hone in your skills.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Goodman?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kunert, thank you for your application.
Thank you.
My question for you goes to skill set and your interest in the Supreme Court. We have 8 district court judges that have applied, and I'd like you to help the commission evaluate those applicants, including yourself, who are private practitioners and what they bring to the Supreme Court as distinct from district court judges. And then secondly, I would like to ask you, do you believe your skill set and personality is most suited to an appellate court as opposed to a district court? And tell us why you're applying, please.
Thank you for the question. And I know this has been, I've discussed this with other members of the commission regarding going from private practice to the appellate level without serving as a district court judge. And I think historically, if you look at the court, that does happen, and then the reverse also happens as well. My practice has been, as I stated in my opening, focused on researching and writing. It's focused on doing appellate work. it's focused on being in front of the district court, litigating cases, understanding how to litigate cases and how the system works at that level. I feel that my skill set, because of that, because of my academic credentials that I have, as well as my focus these 13 years on my writing ability and my speaking ability and my researching, would make me a ideal Supreme Court justice. I understand, the district court judges obviously hear cases at the district court level and decide those cases, but they're not doing appellate work like I've done this past 13 years. They're not before the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court making arguments or preparing briefs for those arguments. So I believe my skill set does fall in line with what is needed for the next Supreme Court justice. As far as your follow-up question, I think to be a good appellate justice, you have to have integrity, you have to have an open mind, you have to be willing to listen to your fellow justices to understand their point of view and where they're coming from, their argument. I understand that you're going to be making decisions that don't always, not all justices will agree upon, or not all people will agree with, and those are hard decisions to make. I've made those decisions in my practice. I have to make those decisions every day with clients, and I understand that as a member of this court, you have to follow the law and you have to apply the facts to the law, and that's something that I've always held true in my practice of law, and I would do as a member of this court.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Bloom?
Is the mic on?
Yes.
Okay, good. So in your application, you use some rather harsh words to describe the legislative and executive branches of Iowa government. And so they are all elected either every 2 years or 4 years. So my question is, I'd like you to expand on exactly what you meant with the words you chose and whether you think they reflect the people of Iowa.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Bloom, which words were those in the application?
Well, basically that the other branches of government other than the Supreme Court are biased and prejudiced, something to that effect.
Okay. I don't recall specifically stating that, and I guess if I did, it would have been in the context of more of the idea of separation of powers. And what I've talked to with other members of the commission is that this court needs to be the neutrality. It needs to be the impartial, unbiased decision maker when it comes to issues that face the legislature or the executive branch possibly overstepping their boundaries. And what that means is that the court needs to take a look at those with a neutral view and applying the law as it is to the facts and making those decisions that might be, as I was saying to Mr. Goodman, might be harsh decisions or decisions that some people might not agree with. I guess I don't believe that executive branch are biased. If I use that, I was more referring to more of the separation of powers idea that I'm talking about now.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Conover? No questions. Mrs. Roberts? Mr. Robert? Mr. Gray?
I have some, Your Honor. Mr. Kunert, you come from a very large law firm, and I assume that when you try cases, you have access to almost every resource that you can possibly want. Can you assure me that you have some sort of, one of the things that Supreme Court justices do is they look upon and judge the actions of many attorneys, and can you assure me that you have some empathy for those persons who practice in much smaller firms?
Thank you for the question. That's a good question. Yes, at NIMASTER we do have resources, and obviously I try to utilize those as much as possible. And I think that if you look at my track record as far as my dealings with opposing counsel and attorneys and other law firms that might be smaller firms, I have great respect for them. And I have great respect for the amount of work it takes some of those practitioners to prepare for trial or for a hearing. And I understand that people are extremely busy, especially some of the attorneys in the smaller firms, and they might not have all the resources to keep them on track all the time. If you know me, I'm a very compassionate, empathetic person, and I always look at people and the facts that surround it, a certain decision or a certain action that they make, and get an understanding as to why it happened. I don't think I have any bias because I'm in a larger firm. When it comes to attorneys in smaller firms, I'm going to treat them just like I would treat anyone. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Diaz?
I do want to follow up just to point out in the application, Mr. Kunert, about what I think Commissioner Bloom was asking. In your application under paragraph 9, you say, to address an issue as controversial as gay marriage and to do so without the political or societal bias that plagues the other branches of government is not an easy endeavor. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I know that's what Commissioner Bloom was asking about, but that's what it appears to me that he's asking about. And I want you to make sure, I want to make sure that you've given an opportunity
Yes.
to respond to that. Do you think you've already commented on that, or do you want to add to it?
I can add to it real briefly. What I was referring to there is that the other, obviously, the legislature has the political battles that go on up there between the parties. And what I was referring to simply was that that's not for the court to decide. The court is not a political body to make those decisions. And that's what I was referring to. I wasn't trying to say that they're biased in a negative connotation. It's just the way the political machine works here in Iowa and all over the country. Thank you.
Mr. Bevel, did you have your hand up, or did Mr. Diaz beat you to it? I do have a question. You got to be quicker now. I have a question. You have about 13 years experience, and I am unaware of a justice ever on this court who got put on this court with 13 years experience. We have some people with 20, 30 years experience practicing law. What does your experience, I mean, is your experience enough to trump the experience of these other attorneys and judges who are applying? And do you think it's adequate? And if so, why?
I wouldn't say that it would trump other candidates' experiences. I think everyone who's applied for this position has different experiences. I've known attorneys who have practiced for longer than I have and have tried far less cases than I have tried. And that's just a product sometimes of your practice and where you're at, your firm. So I would say that I understand maybe some of the questions about my years of practice and whether that's sufficient. I think that, for one, bringing somebody on the court at my age or practice level is, again, a more diverse, another interest that's not represented on this court. Secondly, my experience as outlined in my application shows that I've been trying cases. I've been doing appeals. I've been, in those 13 years, I've gotten the experience that I think it takes to be on the bench and to serve in the capacity of a Supreme Court justice.
Thank you. Any further questions or follow-ups? Well, again, thank you for coming this morning, Mr. Kunert, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much.